Shalom and Shavua Tov. Shalom from the holy city of Jerusalem. Good to be with you today, the third of the month of Av, Menachem Av of this year of redemption, 5776. Corresponding to the 7th of August of the year 2016. Today we have entered the real heart of the so-called 9 days, the 9 days of mourning that precede the observation of the 9th of Av. Coming this Shabbat will be the actual 9th of Av, commemorating the destruction of the first and the second temples. But since the occasion falls on Shabbat this year, it is deferred until the following day, the actual fast day, which will be this coming Sunday, August 14th. And just let me say a word about our schedule. This week, with the help of God, we will have our Kollel today, tomorrow, Monday, also on Wednesday and Thursday. This will be our normal schedule. The week afterwards, the week with Tisha B'Av at the beginning, Sunday, August the 14th, there will be no classes. This is a fast day, and on Tisha B'Av, the study of most parts of the Torah is not practiced. We only study sections dealing with tragedy and disaster and the laws of mourning. So there'll be no class next Sunday, 14th of August. After that, on Monday the 15th of August and Wednesday and Thursday of that week, we will, God willing, have classes. And right now too, it seems to me that in this chaotic world which we are faced with, it is our greatest possible practice is to be studying our holy Torah and to be deepening our insight into the Torah. And so in just a moment we will resume our study of the book of Daniel, looking now at chapter 4 of the book of Daniel. And so let us turn to our study of the Tanakh. Shalom, today the 3rd of Menachem Av of the year 5776, corresponding to the 7th of August of the year 2016. We today resume our study of the Tanakh with the study of Daniel chapter 4, which is a narrative unto itself. The main theme of our studies in this series is Daniel's end-time visions. And according to a superficial reading of this chapter 4, with its narrative of Nebuchadnezzar having a dream, which this time he does remember, and in his consternation he turns to the wise men of the Chaldeans, all of the sorcerers, the wizards, and so on, and only Daniel can interpret the dream for him. Prima facie, it seems that this is not an end times vision, and later on in the book there's a lot more that is very much bound up with end times visions and prophecies. But here in this chapter 4, we are faced with a narrative which really shows what is the purpose and the goal of the whole creation, which is that even the wicked should come to acknowledge that the Holy One, blessed be He, the one that gave Israel the Torah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be He, is supreme over all creation, and no man may allow himself to become puffed up with vanity and pomposity, because everything that he may have is only given to him by God, who can take it all away in the blink of an eye. And this is the moral of the story. We shall come across a number of very interesting points in the course of the narrative, And let us therefore turn to the text of Daniel 4. I will not be reading most of it in the Aramaic, but certain portions I would like to read in the Aramaic. The chapter begins, Daniel chapter 4, verse 1. I, Nebuchadnezzar, was calm in my home and fresh and vigorous in my palace. This is Nebuchadnezzar writing his own story, which, as we see from the end of the chapter, he feels incumbent upon him to publicize among all the nations because of the lesson that he drew from this story, this profound lesson, since he was in his time and practically ever since one of the most powerful, strong men in history, coming from Nebuchadnezzar, his own testimony of the greatness of the Rabbanu Shalom, the master of the universe, the one who revealed the Torah to Israel through Moses. There he was, Nebuchadnezzar, calm and tranquil, and in a state of the Aramaic word shaleh, has the same connotation as the Hebrew word shalavah, which means really supremely joyous and happy, calm, and euphoric. And then he has the dream that shakes him, and he then brings all the sages of the Chaldeans before him, the sages of Babylon, and none of the other sages can tell him what the dream is. The difference between this chapter and chapter 2, obviously, is that here Nebuchadnezzar no longer requires the sages of Babylon to tell him what he dreamed. He remembered exactly what he dreamed, and that was what was so terrible. But we shall see how when Daniel comes before him, it is to Daniel that Nebuchadnezzar reveals the dream, asking for its interpretation. And from here, from chapter 4, verses 7 on, because of the very great beauty of the stately and noble Aramaic, I would like to read from verses 7 on for a few verses from the actual Aramaic text. And here you have it before you, and we're going from Pasuk Zayin, verse 7. This is Nebuchadnezzar's narrative. V'chezvei reishi al mishkevi chozei haves. The visions of my head I saw upon my bed. Ve'alu, behold, this very powerful word, alu, kind of the prototype of hello, what is this? Ilan, bego ar'o, ve'rumei sagi. There's a tree that is in the midst of the earth with its height abundant. And now let me read these verses, the whole verse. You can read it in your translation before you. Revo Ilona uskif, v'rumeh yimtei lishmayo, v'chazoiseh lesof kol ar'o. This great tree, Nebuchadnezzar sees it stretching to the very ends of the earth. Now the very beautiful language of verse 9 in the Aramaic. Let me just get this straight for you, please. Ofyei shapir ve'inbei sagi u'mazoin lechoilo vei tchoisohi tatlil chivas boro uva'anfoihi yeduron tziparei shmayo u'minei yitazin kol bisro. This tree is no ordinary tree. Its branches are so beautiful. Its fruits are very many. And this tree provides mazon, sustenance for everybody. It has sustenance for everybody. T'chososi tetalel tatlil chivas boro, beneath it shall take shelter the beasts of the field, of the outside. Uva anfoihi yeduron Tziparei Shemayo, and its branches that shall dwell the birds of the heavens. Umenei yitezin kol bisro. All flesh is gaining sustenance from this tree. This is the tree of Malchut, the tree of the kingdom, the attribute of Malchut through which God Almighty runs the world. And there is the Holy Malchut, which is the source of all of the Olam, all of the created world. And the Malchut, the Holy Malchut, has a hidden channel which feeds the Malchut of the Sitra Achra, the kingdom of the other side, the forces of impurity. And it is the head of all those forces of impurity that stands Nebuchadnezzar, representing the Malchut of the Sitra Achra. As we saw in chapter 2, it is Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar that is the golden head of the statue he saw in his previous dream. Now he sees the Malchut as the tree. And then to continue with verse 10, Choseh haveis bechezvei reishi al mishkevi. There I was looking in my visions of my head upon my bed. Ve'alu ir v'kadish min shmaya nochis. Behold, an angel, a holy being from the heavens descending. And this is the angel that will call to destroy the tree. What is particularly interesting about these Aramaic words in our text is that, as pointed out by Rabbi Nachman of Breslev, in a teaching that is contained at the very beginning of his work, Likutei Moharan, these Aramaic words actually allude to the author of the Holy Zohar, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. This angel, this holy being coming down from the heavens, the letters of the name Shimon are at the beginning of each of the words. Ayin, Vov, Mem, Shin, Nun. These Hebrew letters, Ayin, Vov, Mem, Shin, Nun, spell out the name Shimon. And Rabbi Nachman connects this with a verse in Deuteronomy that says that the Torah shall not be forgotten from his seed, where there the Hebrew words spell out the name of Rabbi Shimon's father, Yochai. So we see from Rabbi Nachman's comment on this verse that the spiritual force that is coming to cut down the tree of impurity is the spiritual force that is coming from the very neshama of the Torah, from the tradition of the Kabbalah as brought down by the figure of the holy tzaddik who is like an angel, Shimon. So the angel, as the narrative goes on to tell us, Korei v'chayil v'chein omar, the voice is calling out with great power, with great strength, and so it said, Goidu yilono v'katzitzu anefoihi ataru ofyei. The voice is saying, cut down the tree, hew off its branches, going one by one through the phrases given above, the branches, the fruits, it's all going to get cut down. Ataru ofye. Scatter all of its branches, and Vadaru inbe, scatter its fruits. Tenu de chiveso mintchisohi, all of the wild beasts shall go running away, go wandering away from beneath it. V'tzeparayo min anfohi, the birds from its branches. Baram, however, ikar shorshohi ba'aro shvuku. the very root of its roots. These two words here are both in Aramaic and in Hebrew refer to the roots of a tree, but the ikar is the very the main root from which everything else is coming out, which we would call as it rises up the trunk of the tree. And the shorashim, these are the underground branches, the roots that burrow under the ground in the earth. Shavuku, leave them. Uve'asur difarzel nechosh bedis'o divoro, while being chained up with chains of iron and bronze in the grass that is outside. Uvetal shmayo yitztaba, through the dew of the heavens shall he be washed. Ve'im chiveso chalokei ba'asav ar'o, with the wild beasts of the shall be his portion, with the herbs of the earth. Livavei min enosho yishanon, olevav chivo yisihiv lei, his heart shall be different from that of mortal humans. A heart of a wild beast shall be put in him. V'shiva idonin yachlefun alohi, 7 seasons shall pass over him. And all of this is the decree of the celestial angels. And let us now follow through the narrative without going through every word of the Aramaic text. So all of this is through the decree of the Holy One, and all of it is to serve one purpose, as is written in verse 14, a very important verse for the moral lesson of this chapter. It is through the decree of the angels, the celestial saying, the fiat of the holy beings in the heavenly court, for the purpose that all the living should come to understand that there is one supreme being whose kingship rules over men, and he gives the malchut, he gives the earthly power, the empire, to whom he wishes, and he may even bring up the lowest of men to this power. So that was the dream that Nebuchadnezzar related to Daniel, and now he wants the answer. Well, not so fast. We see that in verse 15. Daniel is shocked. He's in a state of verse 16. He's in a state of shock. He cannot answer. He's silent for a long while, with his thoughts throwing him into confusion. But then he answers. The king soothes him. The king is clearly disturbed. He's not quite as aggressive as he was the first time round when he threatened to kill anybody who can't tell him what he's been dreaming about. So then Daniel, perhaps part of his consternation was because he knew that it was a very negative dream, and he did not want to get Nebuchadnezzar into anger. We see that Daniel answers Nebuchadnezzar in verse 17, the tree that you saw that was so great and powerful, with its height reaching to the heavens and casting its appearance over the whole earth, with its beautiful branches and its many fruits and food to everything, with all of the animals of the wild and in its branches the birds. Verse 19, Ant hu malko. That is, you are the king. That is what the tree is. In our song of the Shabbat table on Friday nights, Ka Ribon, we address God as Ant Hu Malko, and this phrase is drawn in the song of Shabbos from our text here in Daniel 4. Ant Hu Malko, you are the king with the power and the earthly power reaching up to the heavens. Nebuchadnezzar had this phenomenal power that made it possible for him to be the one to destroy King Solomon's temple. This was no mere feat. It required not only military force, but a mission of God. And that was why his malchut, his kingdom, extended to the very heavens, and his empire to the ends of the known earth. And when he says in verse 20, Daniel now explains the coming down of the holy angel from heaven, telling the forces that be to destroy this tree, except to leave its roots in the ground. This is when Daniel in verse 21 explains exactly what is going to be the decree. Here is a decree, he says, that is going to come upon you, your majesty the king. Verse 22, they are going to drive out from humanity, and your dwelling place is going to be with the beasts of the field, and you will be eating the herb of the field like oxen, and that's what they will feed you, and you'll have to wash yourself with the dew of the heavens, and these 7 seasons is going to come upon you. Now, and the whole purpose, as he says, is all that you should know that it is God who is in charge of everything. So here there's actually a very interesting correspondence between our verse here and the rabbinic midrashim about King Solomon, who at the beginning of Koheles, Ecclesiastes tells us, Ani hayiti melech b'Yerushalayim, I was the king in Jerusalem. There's a whole story about how Solomon used to go to the mountains of darkness way over to the east, because it was there that the wicked angels of Azza and Azael, who had been cast down from the heavens, were chained to the earth. These are the angels that took a fancy to the daughters of man, as related at the beginning of Genesis. And there they were chained, these 2 angels, and there all of the forces of darkness would gather to hear what they had to say. And there were serpents and terrible creatures there, and no normal mortal was able to get there, but somehow Solomon was able, with his on the wings of his eagle, able to get over there. And there's a long midrash, which hopefully we shall come to some other time, about how Solomon was actually able to get control of the demon king Ashmodai, transliterated in English as the Asmodeus, and how eventually Ashmodai was able to trick them into letting him loose, and he was able to depose King Solomon and sat on his throne as if he were Solomon, and Solomon was left to wander around with nothing but left to him after all his grandeur and glory, the builder of the temple, the builder of these other fantastic constructions in Jerusalem and up and down the land of Israel, who held sway from the river Nile to the river Euphrates. Here he is cast out. Ani Koheles melech hoyisi b'Yerushalayim, I was the king in Jerusalem. Well, now the Midrash also relates elsewhere that when the Queen of Sheba came to visit Solomon, just that it's known that Solomon had very many wives, so too he had union with the Queen of Sheba, according to the Midrash, and out of that union was born Nebuchadnezzar. So Nebuchadnezzar was really the nemesis of Solomon. But Solomon knew God. He had the humility to know God. You can only get such wisdom from the knowledge and awareness of God. But this is something that Nebuchadnezzar was still lacking. Here he calls Daniel by the name of Nebuchadnezzar's pagan god. And so the message of Daniel to Nebuchadnezzar is, this is going to happen to you as well. With all your inflated material earthly power, you're going to get pulled down until you will learn this lesson. And only when you've learned that lesson will you be able to be to return to your kingship. Well, now, verse 24 is very significant. Daniel, after telling Nebuchadnezzar the terrible interpretation of his dream, here gives him advice what he should do. Therefore, King, my advice, let it be pleasing to you, would be that your sins you should redeem with charity, and your transgressions by showing compassion to the poor, and that will give length of days to your good state, your shalava. Well, now, Daniel was actually criticized by the sages for having given advice to a pagan how he could save himself. After all, at this stage, before the dream actually was fulfilled, Nebuchadnezzar was a pagan, and the Torah forbids an Israelite to give good advice to a pagan. You may give advice to a non-Jewish person who is not going to pervert it to evil, but to a pagan one should not give advice. And Daniel was criticized. The Talmud tells us in the tractate Bava Basra on Daf Dalet Amud Aleph, page 4 on the A side of the page, that Daniel was punished for having done this in later time. There are those who say that in the Megillat Esther we find that the messenger who went between Esther and Mordechai was called Hattach. And Hattach, our sages said, is identical with Daniel. Daniel was in that same generation of the exile of Jechoniah, and it was Daniel that was Hattach. And the sages gave two different plays on the name Hattach. One is that he was called that because Hattach has the connotation of cutting down, and Daniel was cut down from his greatness, and so that was one way in which he was punished. The other opinion is where his name Hattach alludes to his having influence over all of the affairs of the Persian Empire, and all matters were cut up and decided according to him. That was not when Daniel was punished, but it was when he was cast into the lion's den, as we shall see later on in the ensuing part of the book. So then the conclusion of this chapter tells us the final narrative, how indeed all of this came to pass because of Nebuchadnezzar's swelling with pride and arrogance. Verse 26 of chapter 4. At the end of 12 months, and this is Nebuchadnezzar telling the story himself, this Nebuchadnezzar's testimony, all written in the first person. There he was in the palace of the royal palace of Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar tells he was walking around, and the king said, "Look at this mighty Babylon that I have built as the home of the empire, the kingdom, through the power of my strength and the glory of my splendor." And the word only went out of the mouth of the king, and there came down a voice from heaven and told him that Nebuchadnezzar, you're the king, the kingdom is taken away from you. and they're indeed going to drive him out of human society. He will be with the beasts of the field, and he will eat the herb of the field like oxen until the 7 seasons, however long they are going to pass over you. He has to go through the whole series of the 7 sfirot, all the levels of knowledge and understanding that are on the unholy side. He's got to go one by one through all these seasons as a beast. In some ways, it seems to me there's one very end times allusion in this whole section. We do see how the most sophisticated of our societies are indeed reverting today to complete barbarity and Philistinism and to sexual immorality gone crazy. We've returned to the state of the flood, and that way people have descended again with all of the sophistication of contemporary civilization, have descended again into animality, and perhaps the world is being plunged deeper and deeper into this until all people will have to wake up and see that the chaos and the destruction that all this is working is the hand of God Almighty, whose morality this flouts. So there we see how Nebuchadnezzar is in this state until in verse 31, at the end of all the days of these 7 seasons, he says, I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes to the heavens, and only then did my understanding return. And then he gave blessing to the supreme being, to God, and he gave praise and glory to the life of the universe, whose power is whose might and empire is the eternal power, and whose kingship is from generation to generation. So this is the whole moral conclusion of this tale of Nebuchadnezzar, that all of the inhabitants of the earth are as if they were nothing in comparison with the Almighty, who does his will in the hosts of the heavens and the inhabitants of the earth, and there's nobody that can prevent him, to stop him and say, what did you do? And it was only then, with this recognition, that Nebuchadnezzar's true human consciousness returned to him, and he returned to the glory of his kingdom. And therefore, as we see at the conclusion of verse 34, Nebuchadnezzar gives praise and exaltation to the King of the heaven, and for all of his works are true, and his paths are justice, and anybody who goes with pride and arrogance, he has the power to humiliate them. Well, just as another midrashic conclusion to this narrative, we find also in the midrash that when Nebuchadnezzar died, his body was dragged out in complete humiliation to him, dragged out. And the reason was because when he went through this period as a wild beast, he was deposed from his kingdom. So a regent was appointed. That was his son, Evil Merodach. And Evil Merodach was in charge. But when Nebuchadnezzar returned, he of course cast him out and nearly got him killed. So when Nebuchadnezzar really eventually did die, Evil Merodach was quite afraid to take on the kingship, and it was absolutely certain that Nebuchadnezzar was dead, and that was why, as the prophet had prophesied, Nebuchadnezzar was taken out and dragged through in the public gaze. So with that, we conclude this discussion of Daniel chapter 4.
Yeah. Hashem
Shalom. Welcome once again now to our second segment of today, which will be our study of the Mishnah Sanhedrin, continuing with Sanhedrin chapter 3. Shalom today, 3rd of Av of the year 5776, corresponding to the 7th of August 2016. We continue with our study of the Mishnah in Tractate Sanhedrin, going now to chapter 3, Mishnah Chet, the concluding Mishnah of this chapter, which continues with the subject of the procedure in a case before a bet din. And this is continuing on with mainly the laws of monetary cases, but may also have application to other cases. The person is faced with a lawsuit and he's got to bring a proof, and if he brings a proof that is incontestable, then he will be able to overturn the suit being brought against him. So how long does a person have in a case to bring his evidence? So here our Mishnah continues, Kol zman shemivi ro'oyo. All the time that a person is able to bring a proof of his own side, his own case being a fair, just case, soiser es hadin. This would overturn the judgment. We heard in the previous Mishnah the procedure of actually the bet din delivering their verdict to the two contesting parties. But if thereafter, according to the simple meaning of the opening of this Mishnah, even afterwards, if a person suddenly found a proof, this could be, for example, if there was a dispute over the ownership of a house or some other property, and the person who claimed to be the owner was actually the orphan who had inherited the property from their father, and people had contested his ownership, and it was only later that he found the deed of ownership. Only if he brought that evidence after the court had decided without it, then that would overturn their case. Well, now, if the judges told him to get with it already and bring his proofs, continuation of the Mishnah, Amru Loi, if the judges sitting there during the deliberations said to him, Kol R'oyois sheyesh lecho hove mikan ad shloshim yom. All of the R'oyos, all of the proofs, the visible proofs, the documents or the witnesses that you have, bring from now until the expiry of 30 days. Motzo b'soich shloshim yom soiser. If he found evidence in the course of those 30 days, he will be able to overturn the judgment against him. Le'achar shloshim yom einoi soiser. If he only found something after 30 days, this does not overturn the judgment. That is the opinion, the first opinion of our Mishnah. There is a more lenient opinion follows. Omar Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. So Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, Ma yaseh sheloi motza b'soch shloshim yom u'motza la'achar shloshim. What shall this person do that he did not find evidence within the 30 days, But he found it after 30 days. Suppose the orphan only came across a hitherto unseen chest full of documents and sorted through only later on. However, the first opinion wants to put a limit on the ability of the individual to bring evidence for fear that either he will forge a document or that he will produce false witnesses. If the judges said to him, well, bring witnesses, and he says, I have no witnesses. They told him, bring a proof, and he actually said to the court, well, I have no proof. Afterwards, he produced a proof and he found witnesses. This is nothing. Our phrase here, ze eno klum, is a very frequently used Talmudic and Mishnaic phrase to indicate that his claim has no force. If he did bring witnesses after having said he had none, he brought proof after having said he had none, that is nothing. That is not going to contribute to his case at all. Again, fear of forgery, of producing false witnesses. Amar Rabban Shimon Gamliel, he says, what should this person do that he did not know that he had witnesses and afterwards he discovered there were? He did not know that he had a proof, only afterwards did he find the proof. So now the third section of this Mishnah, if they said to him, well, bring witnesses, and he said, I have no witnesses. Bring a proof, he says, I have no proof. And then he sees that he's getting judged guilty, being going to lose this case. And now he says, approach, stand forth, Mr. X and Mr. Y, and give testimony on my behalf. Or he pulls out a proof, some document, mitoch afundosoi, from under his vest or from his under his belt. That also has no legal force. And here, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel does not dispute the first opinion in this section of the Mishnah. Here, it's so obvious that the person only pulls out his forged proof or brings forth his false witnesses when he sees he's going to lose the case, and there everybody agrees that this has no force. So now we move straight on to Perek Daled, chapter 4 of Sanhedrin, and this continues now to examine the procedure of the Bati Dinim. And in the first Mishnah, we are approaching the subject of Dinei Nefashot, of capital cases, namely cases of murder or where somebody stands to be executed by the Bet Din. And we're going to deal first of all with what are the differences in procedure between monetary cases, where if a mistake is made, restitution can be made, and capital cases where if the person is decided to be guilty, then he faces the death penalty, and that cannot be undone. So there are numerous differences. There are by tradition 10 differences between monetary cases and capital cases, and our Mishnah enumerates most of them. So one thing that monetary cases and capital cases have in common is that the court must investigate the witnesses. Echod dinei mamoinois ve'echod dinei nefashois b'derisha uv'chakiro. It's one and the same, be it laws of monetary cases or cases involving nefashot, human beings, the life of people, capital cases. The thing they both have in common is derisha v'chakiro. the investigation and the research. These two words are nearly synonymous in the Hebrew. They both appear in a number of contexts. In the book of Deuteronomy, in the case of the adulterous city, and other cases where the judges are enjoined to make very careful investigation about the reports they have been receiving. Drisha is related to the word midrash, where we search out the meaning of the Torah verses. Hakira is the root of chakar, means to investigate, to search out, to try to fathom. To the greatness of God, there is no fathoming ligudulato and chiker. So hakira and drisha are both integral parts of the procedure in both kinds of cases where the judges have to ascertain what actually happened. When did it happen? Where did it happen? What was the action that was witnessed? Who were the participants? Who were the witnesses? Shenema, it says in the Torah, Deuteronomy chapter 24, Mishpat echod yihyeh lochem. There must be one law for you. From this verse, our sages learn out that one and the same law governing this part of the procedure applies both to monetary cases and to capital cases. So now the Mishnah goes on to start enumerating the numerous differences between them. Ma bein dine momonos lidine nefashos. What is there between monetary cases and capital cases? What's the difference? Dine momonos b'shloisha. Monetary cases are adjudicated by 3 judges. We already heard this part earlier. V'dine nefashos be'esrim u'shloisha. When it comes to capital cases, lives are involved. It has to be 23 judges, as we already saw. Dine momonos poischin bein lizchus bein lechovo. When it comes to monetary cases, we start off. Whoever's going to speak first, the person suing or the person defending, we can equally hear one or the other. Bein lizchus bein lechovo. We can hear either to the person's merit or to his guilt, to his cost. We can hear the arguments for and against in no particular order. Normally a person is influenced by the first thing that he hears and hears everything else in that context. It doesn't matter too much if it's monetary cases. Dine nefashos poischin lizchus ve'ein poischin lechovo. When it comes to capital cases, the judges in their deliberations are going to start off with that one of the panel of 23 who is going to argue in defense of the accused, to get him to be zakai, to get him to be worthy, to get him off the hook through some argument or other. So we start off with the defense. The judges in their deliberations don't open up with somebody who's going to attack the defendant. We do all we can when human life is at stake to argue in favor of the accused. Dine momonos matin al pi echod. Monetary cases, we may incline according to the mouth of one of the judges. There's 3 judges on a bed din, on a rabbinical court, dealing with monetary cases. So the matter may be decided through a simple majority of 2 against 1. And this could be whichever way the decision will go. Bein lizchus, bein lechovo. Whether it is to the side of merit or to the side of guilt. Are we going to let him win the case or lose the case? V'dine nefashos matin al pi echod lizchus v'al pi shnaim lechovo. When it comes to capital cases, we incline the scales of justice according to the mouth of one of the 23 judges, namely a simple majority of 12 against 11. Lizchus, if we are swinging it to acquit the defendant. V'al pi shnayim lechoivo. It must be through the mouth of two judges. There has to be a clear majority. Out of the Bet Din of 23, there's got to be 13 who are in favor. Who, if there's got a clear majority to rule the person guilty. Now, we learned earlier the biblical verses upon which this is based, that the Torah in Mishpatim, Exodus, tells us, Al tiyeh acharei rabim lero'os, don't be with a simple majority to do something bad, but acharei rabim lahatois, you can be with the majority to incline, if it's a simple case, namely monetary law, but don't go after a simple majority if it's capital cases. Now the next section of our Mishnah dealing with the differences between capital cases and monetary cases. Dinim mamanas machazirin bein lezechus bein lechoivo. Monetary cases, you can bring the case back into the court for examination of further evidence, regardless of if we're going to acquit the person or if we're going to find him guilty. Such a case need not be necessarily one lawsuit by one individual against another. It could be, for example, for a fine for damages, and this would depend upon testimony, and the court could either decide the defendant to be going to have to pay the penalty, chovah, or to be acquitted from the penalty. So even if the case had already been adjudicated, they could hear an appeal for consideration of further evidence. Either way, din nefashos, when it comes to capital cases, laws of souls, machazirin lizechus, we can bring the defendant back. If he had got a guilty verdict, we can bring him back to try to see if we can acquit him. Ve'ein machazirin lechoivo, we cannot bring him back if he was acquitted. Once acquitted, you can't reopen the case and have him condemned. A very interesting legal principle here. The Mishnah in Sanhedrin later on will discuss how even on the way to the execution scaffold, if even the defendant himself had something more to add, or there were witnesses that came forward, they would bring the case back to see if they could acquit him. So far inclined to the side of kindness, the Torah always is. Dinim mamanis, akol melamdim zuchus v'choivo. In cases of, in monetary cases, everybody is able to argue in favor or against. Recall that there can be, besides the dayanim, the judges, talmidim, students seated there, and they are also allowed to put their voice in if they see argument in favor or against. Dinei nefashos, when it comes to capital cases, akol melamdim zchus. Everybody is allowed to argue in favor of the defendant. Ve'ein akol melamdim choivo. However, not everybody is allowed to argue against the defendant. There are further details to this law that are discussed later on. Dinim mamanus amalamed choivo melamed zechus. In monetary cases, a person who argued against the defendant could then overturn himself and go on to argue in his favor. And somebody who had been arguing in favor of the defendant, you can turn around and now bring points against him. Din nefashos, when it comes to capital cases, somebody who had previously been arguing against the defendant to rule him guilty, he can then turn and argue in his defense if he can bring valid arguments. However, However, somebody who had already argued in favor of the defendant, he cannot go back and change around and now say, no, he's guilty. He cannot argue during the deliberations. Well, now we come to the timing of our cases in the Bet Din, in the concluding part of this Mishnah. When is the Bet Din actually sitting? Dinim mominus donin bayoim v'gomerin balaylo. When it comes to monetary cases, they can pass judgment, they can adjudicate during the day and continue their deliberations until the completion of the case, the verdict of the panel of judges may be delivered at night. Dinin nefashos donin bayoim v'gomerim bayoim. When it comes to capital cases, it all has to be by the light of day. They have to judge, they have to take their deliberations by day. They have to complete the deliberations by day. And once they complete their deliberations, as we shall see, they can't it cannot be the same day. They have to sleep on it overnight. And if the court is faced with a possible guilty verdict, they have to be virtually fasting all the morning, the day after all the deliberations, before they can actually pass a guilty verdict. It's not something that you do after a full breakfast with a glass of wine or a cup of beer or something with it. It has to be done with very great sobriety. Monetary cases can be completed that very same day, whether it is to rule the person worthy, meritorious to win his case, ben lechoivo or for guilt. The capital cases, the case has to be dealt with that day. Lizchus. If they pass an innocent verdict, if they can let the defendant off, then the verdict can be given that day and the verdict of freeing him is carried out that day. But only the following day, as I said a moment ago, only one day afterwards, after they had a time to sleep on it and think it over and deliberate very carefully. Only the following day if they're going to come to a guilty verdict. Lefichoch ein donin, for that reason, they do not conduct judicial proceedings, loi be'erev Shabbos, not on the eve of Shabbat, which is on a Friday, because if it was a capital case and the case was determined on the Friday, they would not be able to complete the verdict till the following day. Bet Din does not sit on Shabbat, and we cannot stretch out the case to Sunday. We cannot let the accused be in suspense, even a day of suspense. What is going to be we don't have in the Torah law the concept of a death row where people can be sitting there for years waiting for a possible execution. We do not allow the case to be to drag on at all. And likewise, v'loi be'erev Yom Tov, not on the eve of Yom Tov. Another difference between laws of monetary cases and laws of capital cases, there is a difference in the way that we hear opinions in the court. When the court is going through its deliberations, there are different levels of wisdom among the people who are taking part in this Bet Din. The people in the Bet Din are some of them very highly experienced Rabbanim. In other cases, there are people of lesser experience. So whose opinion are we going to hear first during the case? Because again, the first opinion you hear, if it's from somebody senior, who is going to dare to dispute his opinion? But you're not allowed to sit there with your mouth closed if you genuinely see some objection even to the opinion of sage greater than oneself. So in now the second Mishnah of our chapter 4 of Sanhedrin, Dine atumois v'hatahorois, when it comes to laws relating to questions of ritual impurity and purity. A question arises in temple times over the purity or impurity of some sacrificial offering. Did it have contact with some unclean creature or unclean substance that would cause it to be invalidated for the temple or for consumption by the priest? These you can start by hearing the opinion of the most senior judge. Maschilin min agodol. We start with the greater of the people who are there. The godel means the biggest person, the biggest sage that is present. Din nefasha is when it comes to capital cases, maschilin min atzad. We start from the side. Remember that in the Sanhedrin, the panel of judges are seated in a semicircle, and the most important and most experienced and senior of the Dayanim will be in the middle, and the people with the least experience and status will be at either end of the semicircle. So we start with the least experience. We let them offer their opinion so that they will not be intimidated into what they consider to be the right decision after if they had heard the opinion of a more senior judge. Now, another difference between monetary and capital cases. Hakol ksherin lodun dinemomenes. All of the different Israelites who are eligible for a bed din are kosher, are eligible to judge when it comes to laws of monetary affairs. Ve'ein hakol ksherin lodun dine nefashos. Not every Israelite is necessarily kosher to adjudicate when it comes to capital cases. A person, for example, could be a ger tzedek, a righteous convert of the first generation, both of whose parents were Gentiles, and such a person would not be eligible to serve on a bet din dealing with a capital case. And it is only the following categories that would be eligible. This would be an ideal Israelite society in the Holy Land where there are priests with their pedigree, Kohanim, the only ones that are Kohanim, the priests, with their priestly pedigree going back to Aaron the high priest. Leviim, people with an acknowledged pedigree as a Levite. V'Yisraelim, Israelites, amasiyin lekahuna, those Israelites that will be accepted to marry into the priestly families. It is these alone that are eligible to judge in capital cases, to be appointed as part of a panel of 23 judges dealing with cases of life and death. For example, a court that was dealing with monetary affairs could have on it, if there was one who was a mamzer, that is a person who was the child of one of the incestuous relationships that the Torah prohibits, such a case known as a mamzer, loosely translated as illegitimate. If he were a Talmud Chacham, since he is a Yisrael, he would be eligible to adjudicate on a monetary case, but he would not be eligible to adjudicate in a capital case because he is not included among those who would be eligible to marry into the priests of the kahuna, the priestly families. So let's now, in today's session, look at one more Mishnah, that is Mishnah 3 of our chapter 4, telling us as I've already mentioned, how the Sanhedrin actually sat. This is talking about a Sanhedrin. It applies both to the Sanhedrin of 23 and to the Sanhedrin of 71. Sanhedrin oyeso kachatzi goren agulo. The Sanhedrin was like a half a goren. The word goren would usually be translated as a threshing floor. We find this in the book of Ruth. We find it numerous places in the Mishnah during the processing of agricultural produce like wheat. You have to start threshing the ears of corn to get the kernels off, and the goren has the same root as it has a root related to the probably to our word granary, grain. It's the place of producing the grain. Well, this would be in a circular area, which would be where all of the ears of corn would be put in, and sometimes they'd use animals to trample on this to separate the kernels. The point is that this is an area circumscribed by a circle, and half of that, which is like a half moon, that is how the Sanhedrin sat. And the Mishnah gives the reason, so that the judges can see one another. There are two scribes or clerks of the judges who are standing before them. They would have their scribes' portable little desk with them and the scroll or the papyrus upon which they'd be writing down the proceedings. Echod miyomin, one is to the right, ve'echod mismol, one is to the left. V'choisvin divrei amazakin v'divrei amachayvin. These scribes are writing down the words of those judges during the deliberations who are arguing in favor of the defendant, and the words of those who are arguing to give a guilty verdict to the defendant. Now, one of the important points about our Mishnah here is not only is it laying down the laws of the earthly Bet Din, but also throughout the Kabbalah, where we are presented with a picture of the the heavenly court. The concept of the panel of the judges, and of course the head of Sanhedrin, God Almighty, but the whole metaphor through which the process of divine judgment is expressed is through the concept of panels of judges. These might be the 70 angels, and there will be their scribes, which are angels that have their names, one to the right-hand side, who is on the side of mercy, the one on the left-hand side, who is on the side of judgment and severity. So after the first opinion of the Mishnah about one scribe on each side, Rabbi Yehuda diverges from the opinion of the first part of the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Shloisha, there's going to be three scribes. Echod kosev divrei amazakin, one is writing the words of those in favor of the defendant. Echod kosev divrei amachayvin, one is writing down the words of those who are arguing against. Vashlishi kosev divrei amazakin v'divrei amachayvin, the third, according to the usual Torah principle of the triad of a thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, is writing down the words of both sides, presumably to get a greater balance. However, the halacha is not like Rabbi Yehuda, as we see here in our Baal Tanura, ve'ein halacha k'Rabbi Yehuda. And with that, we conclude today's study of our Mishnah of Sanhedrin, chapter 4. And I'll be back again in just a couple of minutes with some words for this season of the year, these 9 days between the 1st of Av and the 9th of Av. So now, once again, we will continue for the concluding section of today's discussions. And I would like now to return to the concluding part of the teaching of Rabbi Nachman that we had been looking at last week in Likutei Moharan Torah Tetvav 15 in the first chelek, the first portion of Likutei Moharan. And we had there been discussing the how it is that through elevating our faculty of awe and fear of God to its root, we are able to remove from ourselves all of the harsh judgments, because if we take the initiative to judge ourselves, there's no reason for God to judge us harshly, because we're already chastising ourselves. And Rabbi Nachman gave us the pathway of successively drawing our knowledge and understanding of God down into our heart. He says that the nations of the world also have a level of knowledge and consciousness, but it does not go down into the heart. In other words, there are people with all kinds of intellectual sophistications and mental appreciation and awareness of the boundlessness of the universe, the wonders of creation, but if it does not translate into the heart, the feelings of the heart, into controlling our animal appetites and showing kindness to the creations, and by disciplining ourselves to the service of Hashem, to the service of God, then this knowledge does not come into the heart. And that's what we have to draw down. Moses tells Israel in Deuteronomy chapter 29, only at the end of the wanderings in the wilderness did God give them a heart to understand. And it is in the heart that we find the place of awe and reverence of God. And that is the root of knowledge, that a person knows in his heart or her heart and is aware of God, not only in the mind. And so it is necessary to draw down the intellectual conception of God into the heart, and as part of our very feelings and emotions and intuitions. And there is a concept of having to bind the mind and the heart. So often in our civilization, there's a split between the mind and the heart, or if there's sometimes even no heart at all. So it is when we draw our knowledge and understanding down into the heart that we are going to be filled with the true fear and awe at the greatness of God, and that will stir us to God's service, and then we will attain the supreme awe, the awe of God's outstanding majesty. And all this comes about through idbodedut, through starting off with introspection and judging and assessing oneself, and steadily shedding light in all of the corners of our deep insides. And now Rabbi Nachman, just in conclusion, gives a truly wonderful teaching about prayer, as brought down here in the Kitzur Likutei Moharan, the abbreviated Likutei Moharan, by his student Rabbi Nassan, who has given us a précis of the words of Rabbi Nachman. When we call out to God using adjectives that apply to flesh and blood, and God indeed is accessible to us, makes himself available to us through all of our calling out to him, because indeed people who do practice prayer with faith, we see and we witness how the things we pray about are answered, and there is a response. So the very ability that God has given us to and permission to address him in terms of flesh and blood, compassionate, kind, these are adjectives that are applicable to humans, and we apply them to God even though we cannot see God. So Rabbi Nachman says it is God's kindness itself that gives us permission to use such adjectives and such forms of address to the Almighty. For were it not for the kindness of God Almighty, who has given us this pathway in the Torah, we find the great figures who pray in the Torah, Abraham and Moses. They actually invoke God as the great, the mighty, the compassionate. So if God had not given us this permission, it would not be fit to address God even in adjectives or descriptions or praises or words or letters. It's all God's kindness, and this alone should give a person an arousal when the person is in the course of prayer, and when the person remembers the endless greatness of the Creator, blessed be He, according to the degree that each one can form some estimate in his or her heart. when we consider how God is so exalted, God is above all of these praises. God is above all of these adjectives and descriptions. It's only through his kindness and his compassion and his great mercy that has given us authorization to address him with these expressions or descriptions and titles as we address him in our prayers, as particularly as they are woven into the words of the prayers composed for us by the men of the great assembly, who have woven these adjectives in a profoundly meaningful way on all levels. And the purpose of this is so that we should be able to attach ourselves to God through the words of our prayers. And that's why we should seek to say the words of our prayers, these words of Shmona Esrei, the blessings, with the maximum devotion in our hearts when we consider the kindness of God in allowing us to address him in this manner. So with that, we conclude with this section of today's teachings. I will be back in just half an hour from now with the help of God to give this week's Shavua Tov live video hookup with Yerushalayim. So if you have time and inclination, it'll be my great pleasure to be with you again in just half an hour from now. And for the moment, I wish those of you who believe in me, I wish you Shavua Tov Vorach, a good and a blessed week. And again, I remind you that there will be no class in this series next Sunday, the 14th of August, but on Monday the 15th and Wednesday and Thursday the 17th and 18th of August, there will be the Kollel classes at the regular time. Shavua Tov. Na 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 na